Story 1. While they were interviewing swimmer Janet Evans at the 1996 Olympics, a bomb exploded right behind them. Story 2. The Max Headroom signal hijacking targeted 2 Chicago television stations in 1987. To this day, no one knows who carried it out or why. Story 3. Gary Plosh killed Jeffrey Doucette live on television. Doucette had kidnapped and raped Plosh's son over the course of a week. After Doucette was arrested, he was walked through the Baton Rouge airport while Plosh pretended to be talking on the phone. As Doucette walked past, Plosh raised a revolver, shot, and killed him on live television. Plosh immediately dropped the gun, raised his hands, and was arrested. He received a suspended sentence for manslaughter. Story 4. Howard Cosell announced during Monday Night Football that John Lennon had been killed. Story 5. The Challenger explosion during the shuttle launch broadcast was not officially an interruption, but it was shocking. Story 6. I remember being a kid in 2011, watching The Celebrity Apprentice with my family. Donald Trump was interrupted by a broadcast of a press conference in which President Barack Obama announced that Osama bin Laden had been killed. At the time, finding him felt surreal. Story 7. Transfer of Lee Harvey Oswald by police after the assassination of President John Fitzgerald Kennedy, during which he was shot and killed by Jack Ruby on November 24, 1963. Story 8. David Niven, hosting the 1974 Oscars, had a streaker run behind him on the stage. After the laughter died down, Niven quipped, "The fellow stripped off his clothing to show us his shortcomings. Brilliant adlib." Story 9. They preempted the series finale of Deep Space Nine for several hours with repeated announcements that Princess Diana had died and that details were not yet available. More significant, however, was a 1968 game between the New York Jets and the Oakland Raiders. A 7 p.m. With 2 minutes left in the game, the network cut away so it could start the movie Heidi on time. In the final 60 seconds, the Raiders came from behind with 2 touchdowns to win, one on a fumbled kickoff return. That game led the National Football League to require in its contracts that live games be aired to their conclusion, and broadcast control centers still maintain a dedicated line known as a Heidi phone. Story 10. A somewhat odd incident I witnessed about 20 years ago. During an emergency broadcast test on television, instead of the usual test warning audio, it played Pour Some Sugar on Me by Def Leppard. Story 11. My local church television channel broadcast a gay pornographic film for 3 minutes at 6 a.m. Story 12. John F. Kennedy was shot. The local National Broadcasting Company station in Washington, District of Columbia, ran the coverage, but in those days there was no satellite coverage or film to show. Therefore, they took a camera outside the station to film one ordinary man walking on a cold November afternoon, lowering the station flag to half-mast. No one else was there, and it was dead silent except for the wind in the leafless trees. 10 years later, the station honored the late president by airing a tape of its coverage on the anniversary in real time. When I saw that part of the tape, I cried like a baby. Story 13. Just to lighten the mood a little, a British Broadcasting Corporation interview that went a bit awry. Story 14. The Flintstones primetime special is being preempted by a moon landing. Story 15. The news anchor who died by suicide during a live broadcast. Story 16. The Captain Midnight broadcast signal intrusion. In the late 1980s, home box office began charging a subscription fee and required the purchase of a descrambler to continue watching the channel. Descramblers were not cheap, and this angered many satellite dish users who valued free-to-air television. John R. McDougall, an electrical engineer whose work was directly affected, protested by jamming home box office's signal and replacing it with the message "Good Evening Home Box Office" from Captain Midnight. $12.95 a month? No way. Showtime and the movie channel, beware. A technician noticed the intrusion and attempted to retake control by increasing transmission power. In footage, you can see the technician's attempt and McDougall raising his uplink power to maintain control. Had this continued, the satellite could have been damaged. Investigators identified McDougall and he was charged. To deter others, signal hijacking was made a felony and transmitters were required to be identifiable so intruders could be traced more easily. This did not prevent the later Max Headroom broadcast intrusion. Story 17. That Max Headroom incident was pretty weird. We were watching World's Greatest Newspaper when it happened. Story 18. For British viewers, the 1980 World Snooker Championship final between Alex Higgins and Cliff Thorburn was interrupted for live coverage of the Special Air Service attempting to end the siege of the Iranian embassy. Story 19. The craziest one I witnessed live was Kanye West interrupting Taylor Swift at the MTV Video Music Awards, even though it was of low real-life importance. Laughing out loud. Story 20. Damar Hamlin had a heart attack and collapsed on the field during a football game. Medical personnel resuscitated him and loaded him into an ambulance. That was wild to watch on live television. Story 21. It was the opposite. When hardliners in the Soviet Union launched a coup against Gorbachev, they interrupted the television channels by forcing all stations to broadcast the performance of Swan Lake. Another example occurred at the start of the Gulf War, when all international broadcasts from Baghdad went out because an airstrike destroyed the building from which everyone transmitted. The generals in the Pentagon used the cable news network losing its signal as the indication that the strike was successful because the pilots had to maintain radio silence. Story 22. Princess Diana appeared on Saturday Night Live, and as a kid I thought it was a sick skit at first. Story 23. Leon Gary Plosh was known for publicly killing Jeffrey Doucette, a child molester who had kidnapped and raped his son Joseph Boyce Jody Plosh. Plosh shot Doucette on March 16, 1984, as Doucette was being escorted through Baton Rouge Metropolitan Airport by law enforcement to face trial. The shooting occurred on live television. Story 24. The Dick Cavett Show, June 8, 1971. Dick Cavett's guest was prominent health expert Jerome Irving Rodale, who suddenly died of a heart attack on air during the show. Story 25. Will Smith slapped Chris Rock during the Oscars broadcast. I saw it live, but could hardly believe my eyes. Story 26. Howard Cosell told the world on Monday Night Football on December 8, 1980, that John Lennon had been killed. Story 27. There have been murders on air. Story 28. This was not television but radio. I was driving to work and listening to a local news station that ran traffic reports every 10 minutes. The traffic reporter was describing a tie-up on one of the freeways and suddenly said, "And we are going down." His voice cut off, and someone in the newsroom immediately said it sounded like there was a problem with the traffic helicopter. A few minutes later, they reported a crew was on the way and would let listeners know what happened as soon as they heard back from the field crew. The cause was an equipment malfunction. The pilot managed to make a hard landing. Everyone survived and recovered from their injuries. Story 29. Watching January 6th happen in real time was truly one of the wildest things to see unravel. Story 30. I was not close to many of these, but the man who interrupted a broadcast about a fire was kind of funny. Story 31. In 1993, I remember watching the Holyfield vs. Riddick Bowe boxing match when someone landed in the ring with a fan-powered parachute. People attacked the man. I was 10, but I remember it well. Story 32. The 1989 San Francisco earthquake occurred during Game 3 of the World Series. Story 33. A man experiencing a mental health crisis walked onto the set of a local newscast, held a toy gun to the anchor's head, and forced him to read a sensational statement on air. Story 34. The murder of Lee Harvey Oswald by Jack Ruby on live television. Story 35. Christine Chubbuck committed suicide during a live television news broadcast. If you feel depressed or suicidal, please contact a suicide prevention or outreach service. It is not too late. Story 36. For me, it was the on-air murder of Allison Parker and Adam Ward. I knew Adam. He was a videographer I ran into more than a few times while covering high school football games. He was a really nice guy. I had only met Allison once or twice. Her fiancé later ran for and won a state office on a gun control platform. Sadly, they are not the only journalists I knew who were shot and killed. The woman being interviewed during the live broadcast was badly injured but survived. To cover her medical bills, she sued the station for not providing security. I believe the case was settled out of court. If anyone knows otherwise, I am willing to be corrected. Story 37. Tommy Cooper died while performing live on television at the London Palladium. As I recall, he seemed to just lie down, then the credits ran. My dad said, "I bet he's dead." Next was the news, and the first story announced his death. Story 38. Jack Ruby interrupted the transfer of Lee Harvey Oswald from police custody after Oswald was arrested for assassinating President John F. Kennedy. Story 39. Kanye interrupted Mike Myers to say, "George Bush hates black people," during a fundraising event for Hurricane Katrina victims. Story 40. I randomly think about the 1977 Southern Television broadcast interruption from time to time. A representative of the Ashta Galactic Command interrupted a local British television network to warn humanity about the evils of weapons of mass destruction and the destiny of our world if we do not change our ways. Pretty creepy. This video contains the full broadcast. Story 41. D.O.G. Simpson White Bronco chase interrupted Game 5 of the 1994 National Basketball Association Finals. Story 42. Probably something about Captain Scott O'Grady, Bash 52, getting shot down over Bosnia and Herzegovina. I was living on a North Atlantic Treaty Organization base in the early 1990s. The broadcast of dinosaurs was likely interrupted. It was always a crapshoot whether we got The Simpsons or dinosaurs at 7 p.m. on Fox. I was a little kid and had no concept of network scheduling. Story 43. Howard Cosell announced that John Lennon had been killed on December 8, 1980. It was during the final minutes of Monday Night Football between the Miami Dolphins and the New England Patriots. Story 44. I remember how the assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy interrupted the afternoon soap operas. Story 45. The emergency alert system was hijacked to broadcast that bodies of the dead were rising from their graves. Story 46. Not really an interruption, but a few years ago during a Buffalo Bills game, Damar Hamlin was hit in the chest and his heart stopped. He collapsed on the field. No one knew what was happening, and they somberly went to a commercial. The commercial played a jingle: Whopper, single, double, triple Whopper. Story 47. Terrorists blow up the West German embassy in Stockholm, Sweden. Here is a clip. Story 48. George Bush does not care about black people, said Kanye West. I will never forget the look on the face of Mike Myers. Story 49. An earthquake struck just before Game 3 of the 1989 World Series. Broadcasters were on the air during the pregame show. The game was postponed for 10 days. Story 50. During the Boston Marathon bombing, a live webcam was still broadcasting the finish line. I was at work a few miles from the city and could hear sirens in the distance. Story 51. Sinead O'Connor ripped up a picture of the Pope after her performance. Owen Hart died tragically. Story 52. I know which big news story I am eagerly awaiting. Although I no longer watch live television, I expect I will hear the whole neighborhood break out in celebration. Story 53. I was watching the Atlanta Olympics live one night when the bombing happened. It was so loud I thought there was an earthquake because the camera was also shaking, so it looked like my television was shaking. I was only 10 and home alone. Story 54. I lost access to the public broadcasting service on September 11, 2001, because the broadcast tower was atop one of the World Trade Center towers. I will never forget that. Story 55. I would have to say the Jets versus Raiders game that was cut off before the end, and the 2 touchdowns Oakland scored after the broadcast was cut for East Coast viewers so the movie Heidi could air. Story 56. Mike Myers, Kanye, Chris Tucker, George Bush. No notes, laughing my ass off. Story 57. The Max Headroom signal intrusion in Chicago in 1987. Story 58. Bud Dwyer, treasurer of Pennsylvania, was convicted of several fraud charges and held a news conference the day before his sentencing. He had a paper bag containing a revolver. He took it out and shot himself on live television. All the major Pennsylvania news stations were broadcasting live. Story 59. Saturday morning cartoons were interrupted by footage of the Tank Man at Tiananmen Square. Bizarre and surreal. Story 60. One of the music awards shows, I think it was the Grammy Awards, gave Frank Sinatra a Lifetime Achievement Award. He was older and frail, and they cut his speech for a commercial break. It was cruel. Billy Joel went on stage to perform his big number, River of Dreams, and halfway through shouted, "This is for you, Mr. Sinatra." Then he stopped playing. His whole band stopped. He just sat and left them with dead air. It was live in the days when the delay was about 1 to 3 seconds, and whoever the master control operator was did not censor it. Someone filmed Frank Sinatra backstage. His staff showed him a monitor of Billy Joel sitting with his arms crossed, holding up the whole show for him. Sinatra chuckled. After about 4 to 5 minutes, someone nudged Billy Joel and he finished the song. All evidence of this has been scrubbed from the internet, but I saw it live and so did all my friends I was on a three-way call with. It was a beautiful rebuke to some network executive who cut off one of Sinatra's last times on stage for a damned commercial. Story 61. A reporter from the Columbia Broadcasting System and a camera operator were shot dead on live television. Allison Parker and Adam Ward. Story 62. Spaghetti Cat. Story 63. I heard of a more obscure case that is ultimately pretty hilarious, since nobody died. A disturbed man entered a local news station with a gun and a short manifesto that was apparently pure gibberish. He walked up behind the morning broadcaster, held the gun to his back, and demanded that he read the manifesto. The newscaster remained professional, kept his cool, and read the manifesto verbatim. The broadcast showed only the beginning of the encounter, then cut to black. When it returned, it caught the very end of the manifesto, which read something like, "And furthermore, it is ridiculous to think that I could kill this man when I am armed with a BB gun, a gun that fires small steel pellets." The man was then promptly apprehended by police on camera. Story 64. One morning, someone hacked into our local network and played gay pornography at 8:30 a.m. Story 65. The owner of Channel 9, Carrie Packer, called the network and told them to pull Australia's naughtiness home videos off the air after what he saw. The show never returned. Story 66. 5-Star is getting some interesting feedback on Saturday morning television. Story 67. George W. Bush hates black people. Kanye West, attributed quote. May be unverified. Every dollar you donate helps. Mike Myers says, sticking to the script. Story 68. The Max Headroom signal hijack remains my favorite. A man broke into a television broadcast wearing a rubber mask, wobbling while speaking nonsense, and no one knew who he was. Story 69. When I lived in Phoenix, the local news interrupted the Grey's Anatomy season finale to tell us that there had not actually been a tornado during that evening's monsoon storm. But if there had been one, here is where it would have been. I was not amused. Story 70. There will never be anything funnier than the time they announced the death of Prince Philip during the British Broadcasting Corporation Dance Anthems program. Story 71. If you mean a live interruption to a normal broadcast, I would mention the Challenger disaster and the attack on the World Trade Center. If you mean a surprising interruption during a live show, I would pick a local morning show where the host was about to interview someone and a cat's face appeared, causing him to break into uncontrollable laughter on air. It has been on YouTube many times. Story 72. I remember the earthquake during the World Series game at Candlestick Park in 1989. I was a child, and the television was on while I was doing my homework. It is one of my most vivid memories from that time. Story 73. 1980 World Snooker Championship Final was a major event in the United Kingdom. It was interrupted when the Special Air Service stormed the Iranian embassy in London, bringing the Special Air Service to international attention. Story 74. Honestly, January 6th was pretty wild to witness. I actually could not believe what I was seeing. I am not sure if it was the craziest, but it was definitely worth a mention. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.